Hi everyone, my name is John. Welcome back to my channel, and I have another review for you. It is a review of another Princeton University book. This is by Justin E.H. Smith. It's called Irrationality, A History of the Dark Side of Reason. And here's our author on the back there. And I read this, I think in May, so I just wanted to say a few words about it. In 5th century BC Greece, or so the legend goes, the philosopher named Hippasus was drowned by a member or a few members of his Pythagorean brethren for divulging a critically important secret. As it turns out, a key tenet of Pythagorean philosophy was that all numbers were rational. That is, they could be expressed as a fraction of two integers. But Hippasus was credited, rightly or wrongly, for the discovery of irrationality when he found that the hypotenuse of an isosceles right triangle, with its legs measuring 1, actually had a length of the square root of 2. Which is certainly not a rational number. This understandably upended some of the corollaries of Pythagorean mathematical rationalism, like that the rest of the universe was just as orderly as the numbers were. Hippasus chose to divulge this secret publicly and lost his life as a consequence. And this is all a little fable, really, may or may not have historical basis, to show how our notions of rationality and irrationality are so closely tied together. And this book is basically by that. It's by, like I said, Justin E.H. Smith, who is a professor of history and the philosophy of science at the University of Paris. And this is how he opens the book, with that story. This theme, that reason and unreason chase after one another in a kind of infinite Ouroboros, isn't unique to the Greeks. The Dialectic of Enlightenment, a book by Horkheimer and Adorno, one of the most influential pieces of philosophy to come out of the Second World War, describes how enlightenment reverts to mythology. In other words, how thinking based on the rigorous application of reason can become sclerotic and devolve into fascism. Throughout the book, each chapter, throughout Irrationality, the book I'm reviewing, not Dialectic of Enlightenment, each chapter focuses on one topic ranging from dreams and oneiromancy to pseudoscience and the sort of seething underbelly of internet culture. And he talks about how in many of these instances, rationality and irrationality appear to bring about their polar opposite. Just to talk about a couple of the highlights of the chapters. Chapter 1 is devoted to logic, a term that sounds fairly clear enough on its head, but notice how innocent inquiry can quickly devolve into rhetorically loaded questions that are straight out sophistry, like, when did you stop beating your wife? This line can get just as blurred in science and the millennia-old issue philosophers of science called the demarcation problem. Why were divination and oneiromancy once considered valid ways of arriving at the truth, while they're now considered pseudoscience? How exactly does one differentiate between pseudoscience and science anyway? And we can evoke many different criteria to answer this question, like Karl Popper's criterion of falsifiability, but sometimes these are only narrowly applicable. What's more interesting is when pseudoscience self-consciously tries to take on the trappings of science, as when people who believe that the earth is flat try their best to use evidence to show that the earth isn't round. Smith gets at a real nugget of truth, I think, when he suggests that the patina of science serves as a cover for a more fundamental issue. which is that the whole idea is merely a protest against, when I say idea, I mean the idea that the earth is flat. It is a protest against perceived elite authorities telling us what we must believe, and is indicative of a breakdown in public trust that results when a substantial portion of a population no longer believes in the value of expertise. Note how whenever you try to scratch the surface in conversation with someone who believes the earth is flat, it's not an undergoing I would recommend on a regular basis, but if you ever do that, you'll quickly get to the heart of the matter when they tell you that they start talking about the all-powerful influence of their bête noire, whatever that might be. It's sometimes the Jews, sometimes it's the Trilateral Commission, the Illuminati, the Deep State, the Bilderbergs, you name it. Scratch the surface, one of those eventually shows up. The internet, once vaunted as the great democratizer of knowledge, is now used by social media sites that pay for the programming of complex algorithms to create echo chambers, essentially by feeding users' opinions back to them. This balkanization of knowledge and opinion is likely one of the logical ends in a world that displays such thoroughgoing distrust in science and expertise. I can appreciate the book for what it is, and for what it tries to do in being sort of a broad-based application and consideration of the topic, but he, I think, in the end talks about too many topics and too many things when his attention could be better spent focusing on maybe just one of them. He connects dots in several convincing ways, like when he argues for the connection between the dissolution of public trust in institutions with the rise of pseudoscience. I think that's a very, well, you can argue with it, but I tend to be fairly convinced of it. The other chapters hang there, but are sort of unincorporated into the larger frame of the argument. And overall, the book, I think, is just a little bit on the discursive side and lacks any kind of overarching coherence. Smith has written another book devoted to his criticisms of the internet called The Internet Is Not What You Think It Is, A History, a Philosophy, a Warning, which is forthcoming as of this writing, also from Princeton University Press, that presumably fleshes out some of his arguments more completely. I would actually like to read other standalone books where he takes a deeper dive into individual subjects. While Smith is a philosopher by training, I hope he takes a closer look at the social sciences relevant to his concerns. There is a daunting amount of research out there on things like thanatology and the psychology operating in the minds of conspiracy theorists, etc., little to none of which he touches on in the book. On a more superficial level, it makes sense to recognize the tension between reason and rationality as something uniquely human. We can try to order and inquire and categorize and hopefully make better sense of the world for it. On the other hand, none of these things stop us from being human and all the messiness that does and always will entail. Smith's quiet contention seems to be that our only recourse is to let the two sides, rationality and irrationality, live side by side, doing our best to advocate for reason responsibly, whatever that might mean, without being dogmatic about it, whatever that might mean. Put simply, Smith thinks a kind of fascism rests in rationality and irrationality, while humanity occupies an ambiguous place between the two. Relentlessly and they sort of relentlessly transform one into the other, while the humanity of us, that middle part, rarely takes the time to reflect on the lessons of each or both. Interesting book, but I would have loved for it to be more focused, I guess, is my main complaint. Still thought-provoking. This is Irrationality, A History of the Dark Side of Reason by Justin E.H. Smith. Until next time.